We're recording in process, or in progress. I say, welcome, Ethan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's we were just talking about. I should have recorded our pre-conversation because it gets into a lot of interesting things. But I'm sure we can, like we say in LA, we can leave them wanting more, so we can do a sequel after this. That's what we're always looking for in LA. So, so glad to have you here. It's great for you to be on the Leaders Who Care series. I've been wanting to do this for a while with you. And why don't we start with, if you can just briefly introduce yourself, and then we'll hit it.
Sure. My name is Ethan Mayers. I'm the CEO and founder of Future Proof Agency. We help companies develop innovation and technology positions because the world is changing so fast. You got to see what's going on out there and what you could do about it. The short version of my bio is I'm a former television producer turned technology entrepreneur. I've helped run companies on several continents, and I'm very lucky to have a global perspective. And I believe in the power of mentorship. And I think that's where you and I started originally connecting, and how to give back.
Yeah, I know you did begin your career in journalism or broadcasting communications and whatnot, and then you've seen a lot of diversity. We talked about a little bit now, with your global travels and whatnot. But so before we go into that deeper, I'd like to ask the question: why do you do what you do? Like, what's your why? But why do you do what you do?
Yeah, it's really hard when you're writing it, right? But I think there were a couple of moments for me. So first, I'll start early years. I've always been in love with technology. I was the kid. I grew up, and they said in that generation where I had an analog childhood and a digital rest of my life. But I didn't really have an analog childhood, actually. As long as I could remember, technology was in my house. We were one of the first people on the block to get internet. 14.4K baud modem. My brother used to play baseball, and it was just words on the screen, and I didn't know what was going on, and I was just so curious about everything. And by the time I was 8 years old, I was teaching myself how to code BASIC. I'm not very good at it, but I wanted to learn everything I could about this new device, and I didn't know the profound impact it had. So that was my first love. So technology. And I say now, and of course this is not as a little kid, but with years of experience, technology only does two things. Technology is just a tool. Technology is an enhanced human ability. So an airplane is simply a faster way to run, or it organizes information for decision making. And I didn't know how profound and powerful that tech would become in our world. The second change was I'm in college, and I took a documentary filmmaking class, and it changed my whole career. Then started pursuing broadcasting, and what I learned was that how we create the future is through narratives, stories.
Yep.
Stories are actually the most powerful way that we create the future. It's not what we build, it's how we tell, it's how we communicate. Because, I say in my tagline, build technology for humans, because that's where it is. It's the storytelling, it's how it makes you feel, it's the emotive connection that you have to products and services. And I learned from watching this documentary film class, and then going into broadcasting, the power of story narrative telling. And then my third one was, I'm going along in my early career. I became a TV producer. I moved from there into some consulting work, and I always had impact. I always believed in helping others. But fortunately, I was asked to come in-house at a private equity firm in 2014. And that private equity firm was run by a lot of people that had associations with the United Nations. And I got to be able to see global impact at scale for the first time in my life. And that changed everything for me, because I said, I'm not going to spend even an iota amount of energy or effort on something that's not creating a better future than the ones, a better future for all of us. And of course, I have to give, it sounds generic, but it is important. I have 3 children. So they're a huge motivation for me to say, how we lead today is the world we lead them tomorrow. And that's really important. So my why was really impacted by seeing what's possible from this global impact. So I started traveling the world. And of course, you meet people and you see, sure, the generic, yes, everyone's like you, and that's true, but not everyone has the same resources. The future has been unevenly distributed.
Yeah.
And so even, we have this powerful tool, Google. I think it's one of the coolest tools we've invented as humans, right? But if you don't know the search terms, you don't know what to ask. And I saw firsthand the power of what happens when information was disseminated in such a manner that people could take control of their own future. So, I've mentored companies on 5 continents, and just so powerful when you just give them words. It's like an access key and a point. So that's probably, all of those things came together in a way that made me who I am.
No, it's kind of like we were talking a little bit before about, if you stay in your little hometown, not to stereotype, and you don't go anywhere, even to the next state over, never mind the next country over, you almost don't know what you're missing. And when you do see it, it really opens up your eyes to the possibilities. Every time we talk, it's almost like what I call a fresh forward optimism type of thing, that about making a difference, and how innovation and technology should and does and can make things better for people. Can you share, with our audience a little bit about maybe a few initiatives or projects or engagements you've had that were interesting for you, and how you were being able to build? So I think I read this somewhere with you, how you were able to build the right teams to take bold actions.
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for that. I mean, my flash forward optimism is, you read history and you realize that it may not feel like it, and there's threats every day, and some threats are really severe. But we're in a relatively stable era of peace that humanity almost has never known. We've managed to cure diseases that we didn't think were possible. We've managed to give people hope when before there was none. So I look around and saying that the good that humanity can have when we harness it correctly, when we use our technology and innovations for the betterment of each other, which, by the way, can be completely selfish, right? Like, I want to live a long time. So, if we invent technology that helps you live a long time, it helps you too. I've been lucky to work on a lot of really amazing projects. We helped develop positioning strategies for one of the world's largest NGOs, BRAC. So we actually built their USA website. And, as you said, it's always key to build the right teams to execute. You have to have the right balance of expertise, ability to act quickly, developing the startup mentality, but of course, curiosity, I think, is probably the most important thing in all the projects that I've ever worked on. It's curiosity. You've got to be able to read and just question, and be able to be in touch with your emotions in your heart to say, oh, that doesn't feel right, and let me ask. So it's curiosity plus courage, to me, is the foundation of any innovation. I went to London for a year and a half, worked on an amazing project. We ended up getting into Techstars. We were building global supply chain software to connect textiles in the food industry. So the idea there was resource to retail. So can we connect all the way back to the farms that grew the cottons and the farms that grew the vegetables, and connect it forward? And the power that would have in empowering the middle people in the chain, empowering the farmers, for instance, that are often the forgotten people within supply chains. Yeah. And I was very lucky. We had our technology team in Romania. We had our first customers in India, as well as the UK. So we were traveling all the time and just seeing the power and possibility. I remember the first day we were testing our software at a factory in Pondicherry, India. And just here we are with a tablet at a pretty small factory. I think it was like 200 or 300 people relatively. And the people that were running it were amazing. It was mainly, I'm pretty sure mainly women, very impact oriented, had a lot of benefits like maternal care that many other organizations didn't have. And just the power of all of a sudden this technology that seems so far and so distant and so difficult to interact with. ERP systems, enterprise resource planning systems, can be millions of dollars. And here we are with a small tablet helping them to run their production line, and seeing what the power of when the technology comes to you. And it reminds me, I have another friend right now that's working in Bangladesh on, it's a healthcare mobility company. They're actually bringing the lab to you. They discovered one of the biggest problems in getting blood tests was actually getting to the lab because of traffic, because of time, because of everything else. And if healthcare comes to you. So, and that's with my new project, Future Proof Agency, which is all about, I would get a call every couple of weeks from a friend just saying, what's the deal with blockchain? What do I need to know about NFTs? What's the deal with quantum? How is it affecting? And I always look at technology as this tool. I just have a toolbox and I can just whip out the right tool at the right time. But if you don't understand it, if you're not, you get this feeling that you're on the wrong side of history to really understand what the technology trends that are going to transform. Big thing that I'm working on this year is to be positive, not negative. I felt like the word disruptive, for instance, was negative, and that's not really what the purpose of it is. It's transformative, it's ascendant. So I've been careful to try to use those kind of words. So, because we're a positioning firm, I saw writers and linguists as well as people that really understand new technology to be able to separate the hype. I even saw out a friend of mine who's one of the premier lawyers in the space, in the Web3 space, because we need to understand what the regulations that are coming down the pike, because that's going to be a key. So yeah, so it's all about the team that you put around you and the communication and cultivating this idea of curiosity and bravery.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in there. I also started getting a little bit not leery, but not wanting to use disruptive so much also. So I was kind of switching to reimagine, which is another word, and everything. And they're just words, but as they say, words do matter. So I totally get that. And it's what you say makes me think about a little bit of my career, and it's taken decades for corporate leaders and other leaders to realize that making social impact is actually good for business, not to mention attracting talent. And one quick example I used to work with Ryder System, one of the biggest logistics companies in the world, but they started out as a trucking company. Long story short, they had a lot of young families working at world headquarters in Miami, and they were stressed out. We got to go home, but we got work to do. We got the kids, we got that. They built a daycare center at headquarters, turned the whole morale around with everybody. And yeah, it cost them X dollars. The return on investment was X times a million, basically, for all sorts of reasons. And it's kind of related a little bit what we talked about before this about, so what do we do here? How do we find solutions to these things that will help people, which then helps the business, helps retain talent, et cetera. So share with us a little bit about your experiences in creating and consulting on diverse businesses, diverse cultures around the world, to support that premise that you can have economic impact even better by making social impact.
So in 2010, so 11 years ago, I was at an e-learning platform. We were focusing on compliance and ethics, and we used to have lunchtime conversations at least once a week. And they would be conversations all about this, everything from the triple bottom line. And this is a couple of years before even the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations SDG program was even out.
Right.
And back then, we were having a conversation of how to get companies even to acknowledge social impact. How do these things happen? How do we price in externalities? How do we get companies to recognize that they're part of communities? Right. That it is not a binary relationship between customer and product and service, but it's actually a multi-party relationship between shareholders, stakeholders, and community members that aren't even part of the company. People that don't buy your product or service are potentially still impacted. I think the biggest change that I've seen, and it really makes me happy, is the acknowledgement. Your question is framed in such a way to say, how do you have good impact and good economics? But the thing is, and this is what I like, where we're going, is companies have finally recognized that they have an impact. Whether they do anything or not, the fact is that their existence does have an impact. It becomes, and the change in conversation that I've seen over 11 years is 11 years ago, you had to convince them that they have an impact. Then there was a point where they're like, okay, we have an impact. Now it's about, okay, I should control that impact. So we're finally at the stage, you see all these sovereign wealth funds divesting from oil and gas and other fossil fuels, which is a really good start, but you're seeing a lot more power than that, because what you're seeing is people are holding companies to account for the impact that they're having. Now, you do nothing. Coca-Cola, as an example, used to have lots of problems around the world with distribution plants and just different environmental degradations. It's changed since then, and this is years ago. But it's like, you can't, back then, sure, you might have been able to sweep it under the rug. Back then, you were having conversations about, is impact important? Is impact not important? Now, thankfully, it is, you acknowledge that a company has an impact by its very existence, and therefore you then get to decide whether that impact is going to be positive and negative. Therefore, ergo, when you have a negative environmental, social, or economic impact as a result of your existence, companies and shareholders are holding you, the executive team and the board, to account for this, because whether or not you decided, it now feels like a choice. That's the most beautiful thing that I've seen in the last 11 years. That companies now recognize that they create an impact, they have a choice on what kind of impact they want to make, and they no longer have a choice to sit idly idly by. And that's not to say, we're in a place where it's not as great as it could be. There's a lot of greenwashing. There's a lot of ethics washing. There's a lot of that kind of stuff where companies are spinning deals. But I argue that the more conversations that we have, the more acknowledgement that these things are important. You had mentioned one thing before that I wanted to add on to. Words are one of the most powerful tools we have. So being a human being is complex. It's complex emotionally. Relationships are complex, and yet we have this tiny subset of symbols in order to express every complex feeling, idea, and thought that we have.
Yeah.
The choices we make in those words are profound, and they're necessary. So coming from should we have an impact, have a positive impact, to how do we, is the biggest change that I've seen over the last 11 years.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and it's I love the way you put it. It's just small number of words, if you will, to explain the complexities of a human being, and you know what? In some ways, it's not just the words too. It's the body language, it's the energy, all that's also really important. We have a lot of crazy stuff going on with words right now, and people doing memes and all sorts of crazy stuff that hurt people. And at the end of the day, it's almost, and I get accused of simplifying things all the time too much, but if what you're doing is hurting someone, that should be enough proof that maybe what you said or what you did is not the right thing, and maybe change it and learn from it. So yeah, I love what you say. And it's another good segue into, my grandfather was a big influencer of mine, and he'd take me to the park as a little kid, and long story short, I'd say, Zeta, how do you know all these people? I called them Zeta, I'm Jewish. And he said, I don't know any of them, but when I smile at them, they smile back, and then we start talking, and now they're friends. And it was like, holy cow, that stuck with me like forever, And so with everything going on, it's been going on now, COVID, every variant, technology is still moving a gazillion miles a minute, racial justice, not justice, etc. Have you found that infamous word, an awakening in people you're dealing with, as to what's important for real?
Yeah, I think it's been happening. So I'm not sure if COVID necessarily, what impact COVID will have on specifically. There are a couple impacts that COVID will have. They're not as related to that. I mean, one of them is changing the way in our relationship to work. All of us. If you're in a high-end job, you're probably able to work more remotely and more where you want. If you're a low-end job, you suddenly feel like you have a lot more choice in what you previously did and a lot more power. And those things are all very positive for society, and it's going to shake its way out. I always thought that autonomous cars would reshape our entire urban landscape anyway, because the ability, hypothetically, autonomous cars would reduce traffic significantly enough where people could live in what I call tether cities, 150 miles away. That's happening now. So COVID in some ways accelerated some already existing trends by 10 to 15 years. In terms of values, I mean, we talk about this, the trite thing to say is we're at a crossroads. And the reason why it's trite is because every person in every generation and every year thinks they're at a crossroads. And we are in many ways. It's not just COVID, but the last few years, we've become much more tribal. We've become much more insular, and all of us have. And part of it is, this thing, we call the internet, the information superhighway, this technology, the ability to take this device and access the sum total of human knowledge at a moment's notice, no lag time, no latency, anything we want. It's never existed before. Governments would pay, the equivalent of trillions of dollars for that kind of capacity 100 years ago. And now we take it for granted that for $100, $200 a month, we just have the entire access to human knowledge whenever you want. What we call the information superhighway, what we call the internet, what we call this modern day, is only 30 years old. The smartphone itself is only 14 years old. I would posit that these are infant technologies that society and education and mores and norms have not caught up to. I mean, let alone even legal and regulatory. I mean, there's still a lot out to there. So we've got this awakening of social impact for many good reasons, diversity, climate change. At the same time, we have this box that's giving us access to human knowledge, but it's also been a box for persuasion. It's also been a box for spin. And it's really hard, all of us. And I don't care what education you've got, what background you've had, we've all been susceptible. Confirmation bias is a real thing. It's a real problem. We tend to believe things that we're already strongly inclined to believe, and it actually reinforces the things we don't believe. And so, the values that I want to see, we need to learn how to live with this. We need to learn how to live with this streaming technology. There was an article I read, I didn't check it, so I can't say it's true or not, but it said something like a modern person with all the notifications and all the beeps and things going on has as much information coming at them as a wartime military officer with all the information happening. And that's on a daily basis. And that's why I see a lot of movements towards mental health. I see a lot of movements for people banning the phone from the bedroom.
Exactly.
A lot of movements for people wanting to sleep and rest better and have digital free. I had a digital free week. I traveled to the Adirondacks and I had a completely digital free week, which is not entirely digital free. I got a small phone and just as like an emergency, but I didn't use data. That was my goal for the whole week. So you see people learning to live with it. So I think we're going to, while we're at a crossroads, I do have an optimism for the human race. I do have belief that at the end of the day, light does prevail against dark and that we figure out our way and we stumble along the way. We hurt a lot of people along the way, but eventually prevails. And so the big thing that I think about is we got to learn to live with this technology. We don't know. We don't know. You mentioned early these memes that, why do people send out memes? Because they want to be part of a community.
Right.
Because they want a sense of belonging. I mean, there's a sense of belonging. And I think one of the most profound impacts that COVID's going to have is that we sort of took that away from people for a year, from their families, from their friends, and from communities.
Mm-hmm.
It remains to be seen what will happen. If you study the past and you look at other plagues, because they've happened, plagues have occurred to us. It's hard to believe, but for the most part, societies end up a lot better off because it is a time to deeply reflect, shift, change, transform. And I remember somebody pretty early on, the first few months, saying, "I can't wait to get back to normal." And I was like screaming at the TV, going, "I don't want to go back.
Right.
We have a chance to go forward." And that's where we should be going.
Yeah, no, you hit on so many good points. We'll have to do a sequel for sure. But it's and when you talk about mental health, the most malleable minds, younger people, are getting more overwhelmed as well, more than we ever did as kids. Even though back then, when I can't imagine, because I was super young, when TV came out or newspapers were putting stuff out, there was a lot of new information people were getting then also. And at that time, it was thought of like, holy cow, so much. And so there's similarities, but there is a lot of stuff. And I think we've got to get back to basics very much in being able to live with things and I always say, be kind to people or be a leader who cares, or however you want to say it. So great points. One last thing that I wanted to ask. One client told me this about a quarter of the way through 2021 about 2020. They said, the year has flown by slowly, and I thought that was brilliant. That's what 2020 felt like. So now we're almost in 2022, and it seems like 2021 flew by, type of deal. What are you grateful for, and what are you hopeful for in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I have to start. I'm grateful to have an incredible family, incredible wife and kids. And I read it was interesting, the COVID pandemic actually strengthened between 2/3 and 3/4 of marriages, and about a third or quarter is not going to survive that much close proximity time. But I'm definitely in the part where it strengthens the marriage, which is already good. I already have a lot of really good friends, which I'm very grateful for, and amazing conversations like this one. I'm very grateful to go back to the world. So in 2019, I had 54 flights to 17 countries, and then I haven't really been anywhere since I had one trip to Serbia earlier in this year, and that was it. But I'm already signed up for about 8 countries next year, and I'm back to traveling, and I want to get out there. I think there's a lot of really good people in the world that want to do a lot of good, and sitting down in a room with them where you could feel their positive energy is just so enthralling and just liberating. So I'm grateful for the human connections that we're able to foster again in person.
Mm-hmm.
and that we were able to do it safe. So I'm very hopeful, even though I know we got some variants on the way. I'm generally hopeful for 2022 that this thing we'll learn to live with it, and we'll learn to live with each other better. And that's what I'm hopeful for in the future, and that we keep pushing on and we start listening to each other. The one thing I would hope for the world, my wish, would be that we become much more issues and solutions oriented. We tend to complain a lot. I don't like this. I don't think that. This should happen. This should not happen. Yeah, but it's like, how? Let's really talk about how to solve some of these problems together, because that's really what matters. Like, we're all aware, for the most part, we're all aware of the many problems this world has, but we're not aware yet of the solution. And you listening could be part of that solution. So have a conversation, engage your curiosity, be brave enough to speak up, and let's try to fix this world one time at a time. You're not supposed to fix the world. You're supposed to fix the neighborhood, your person around you. If you can take one person to help them along their journey, then you've changed the world.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it just reminds me as we go about Michael Jackson's song "Man in the Mirror," and that's probably the first place to look, and then go from there. So, all right, there'll definitely be a sequel. So, thanks so much, and it's great to have you. Great to chat with you, and we'll do it again for sure.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.